These tomatoes...
Welcome to the Solo Bros, featuring your pal Colton Phillips. Today we're starting a new series, Sam and Max Hit the Road. It's an ancient game from an ancient day, but as we can see the pixels still look fine. Hella fine. Today is not going to be one of those days where I play any game. Today I'm just going to kind of rap with myself. I feel like if I want to talk about mathematics, this is probably the most intelligent place to do it, you know? I'm surrounded by all these, like, totems and knickknacks and board games on the wall. I feel like I'll actually be able to really discuss my feelings and stuff. So, after this episode is going to be standard affair. I'm going to have a lot of jokes and a lot of really awesome content. You guys are going to give me the thumbs up. You guys are going to recommend iDub roast me. I swear to God, he's going to roast me one of these days because I'm so fucking famous. Oh, sorry guys, I was watching a YouTube video about some guy who thought he was so famous that iDubbbz was about to roast him. I thought I'd chip in there. I'm always just chipping in. I'm not sad, by the way, I'm just talking quietly. So today I'm just talking about...
These tomatoes are rather interesting. They're pretty much different than the last tomatoes I grew last summer. This one didn't need to grow up like a vine as much. The last one, it was sort of a vine tomato and I fucked that up. But this one was more of a tree tomato, and the fruit starts in a white-purple color, and you know when to pluck it when it sort of turns into a dark yellow.
The Laplace transform. I'm in this new class. It's about control theory and signal processing, and I figured this is a really awesome place for an engineer to just do his studying, so...
This one's a little chewy.
Yeah. Okay, Max, you can just say one thing. Say this one thing, Max. Ah, fuck, I'm over here now.
'Cause your pussy tastes like shit! I'm over
It's
here
a good
now.
tomato, though. I think, in retrospect, I would have sliced it.
So Laplace transforms are kind
I'm
of
over
like
here
this
now.
magical mathematical trick that you can
I was
use
over
to
there.
change something from
Now
a
I'm
time
over here.
signal into like a frequency signal,
That's a
or
professional.
like an S domain,
You know, another
something
guy
that has
comes
a
up
real
here,
and
he gets
imaginary
all
plane.
fucked up, drops the mic,
You're probably
puts all
familiar
his
with
I'm over
imaginary
there.
numbers. Imaginary numbers,
Now I came over
like the
here.
letter I, where I equals the square root of -1. So kind of mathematical concept. Makes perfect sense. You completely understand me. And for that matter, I'm really happy to tell you that Laplace transforms are able to take, like, say, like the convolution of two signals, something that's typically really complicated, convolution of two signals, and it just turns it into a multiplicative operation in a different, sort of like in a different space that represents the same information of that function, I guess. So instead of convoluting two signals over time, it's a multiplication of two transforms. I'm not sure what you call them, but they're equations. So, like, for an example, all the functions, like, over time, like, that we can think of are maybe things that exponentially decay to 0, or exponentially increase to infinity, or negative infinity. Or there's also signals that are bounded, and they sort of just reach a final value of, like, 1 or 10, you know, any value is not infinities. Or a signal can maybe be periodic, like a sine wave or a cosine wave, something that's always going up and down. So the S domain, I guess, sort of represents those kind of signals, and the functions that you get from the transform are kind of different depending on if it's an exponential or like a cosine type of function. So, for instance, like if you take cosine 2 omega t and convolute with cosine 4 omega t, those two functions can be called f1 and f2. We can convert them into their their Laplace transform representation and multiply those two instead of doing a complicated convolution series, which has to be like broken into steps, into like these continuous steps of doing the convolution integral. Instead of doing the convolution integral, we can just fucking chill out with these ants, and, you know, I think that's part of the magic of the Laplace transform, is how magically it'll just make things simple with the multiplication. I guess I always have like 10 billion things to talk about other than what's going on in this brand new game. I hope you've watched the Super Mario series, Super Mario RPG. This series is going to be exactly the same, but I won't have to talk as much, so it's going to be so fucking easy. I haven't played this game in a very long time. I don't know the puzzles. I've never beat it. without a walkthrough. I have played a lot of these old games. I've played Day of the Tentacle. I plan on LPing that one day, but that's not what we're doing now because I actually own a copy of this game, so that means I get to let's play it. And it's LucasArts games, so LucasArts are like basically the best shit. Like honestly, this is better than all the games they make these days, so I'm pretty fucking happy to let's play this. Let's playing obviously it takes a lot more time than just playing a game, so you gotta invest more of your life energy into it, so I'm very happy to play a game as dope as this. So if you take in calculus, you'll know a fuckload about derivatives and integrals, and so those are differential equations that are differential in nature, have differential factors in them, something like 2x prime plus 7x double prime plus 3x equals the unit step function, you know, something crazy like that. Well, what Laplace transforms can do is take your differential equation and basically use the fact that the inverse of a differential equation has a certain form, and the inverse Laplace transform of a double prime function has a certain form. So since you know the inverse Laplace double prime function, you can kind of substitute into the differential equation and solve it. I think it's like a general solution, or at least you can turn it into the Laplace domain with s instead of time, with the imaginary and real components. Sort of a function like 6s plus 21 over 2s squared plus 7s plus 3, where s is the real and imaginary value. It's like an imaginary plus a real. So I bet a lot of you are kind of like tuning out and thinking like, holy crap, this must be like a joke, like he's just making something up, but I'm really not. I'm just kind of hanging out. I think I'll make a thumbnail that lets you know that this episode is like complete horseshit. That's pretty smart, Colton. I think you find that the episodes are getting better. We're getting smarter, big boys. We're clean boys. I think you'll realize that the Laplace transform pairs it's basically a table of every possible function that you might be given, or you might want to transfer one function into representing it in another way. Sort of like trigonometric identities can make a function appear in a different form, and if we have it in the right form, we don't have to do the mathematics of actually computing a Laplace transform. Instead, we just use this Laplace table. So, for instance, the unit impulse, which is like the Dirac delta function, it's a function that's 0 at every point, and at 1 there's sort of like a spike that goes to infinity, and I believe if you compute the integral from 0 to positive infinity, it will give you an area of 1, and that's the definition of the Dirac delta function, or the impulse. So I think the Laplace transform is basically an integral, and that's sort of how it solves differential equations. I always thought there wasn't an integral, and now I'm starting to think like that it's basically a complex solution of an integral or something. I don't know, I'm really fucking confused because I don't understand how all these values equal one and one equals the other. So for instance, the unit impulse Dirac delta function, the Laplace transform of that is 1. The unit step function, where everything is 0 up to the point 0 and then everything is 1 afterwards, well, that is 1 over s. And I always think like, what the fuck does that mean, 1 over s? You know, if I take like, boy howdy, if I take the integral of the unit step function, it will be 0 at points negative infinity to 0, and at that point it would just be like a ramp. It would just keep going up forever. It would be 1, and then it would have more and more and more and more, because you'd be adding them all up. It would increase linearly, the unit step function. And I'm fucking thinking like, why is that 1 over s? And then why is the ramp 1 over s squared? That's fucking... And then there's another one, which is 1 over s to the n. So that must be really similar to a ramp. Must be like a special version of a ramp. And it is, I think it's t to the n minus 1 over n minus 1 factorial. I mean, like, what the fuck? Who fucking figured this shit out? Sine of omega t. Omega, like, fuck omega, you know? Omega is just the angle, and I could care less about the angle at fucking sine. At this point, I really don't care what the angle at sine is. The angle at sine can go fucking suck a dick. And that's That's everything for the solid bros. If I just put this a little bit taller, it looks like a hand is coming out of his pants. Looks like he has a sideways vag. You know what that looks like? Looks like he has a sideways vag with teeth. Oh. Looks like he's in his suit. He's walking on his own back. Oh, he saw something from behind him. Oh. Thanks for watching. Next time I won't have to whisper. I'm sorry. Welcome to the Colton Phillips podcast. Today we'll be talking about the Laplace transform and the Laplace transform properties. As we now know, the Laplace transform is a special magic function that transverts a time domain function into a frequency domain function on the S domain, S being an imaginary and real plane. Well, as we've said that before, let's move on. There are certain Laplace transformable functions. F of S is the Laplace transform of f of t. And of course, we've been introduced to the unit step function before, u of t. But we also have to realize that the unit step function can be converted to the unit step function with t minus alpha times the ft minus alpha is equal to e minus alpha s f of s, with big F of s meaning the Laplace transform of the original function. What that means is if you take the Laplace transform of f of t minus alpha times u of t minus alpha, you will get e of negative alpha s fs. So it's just sort of a property of the Laplace transform that if you take a function and shift it by alpha, and you multiply that function with a unit step function with t shifted by alpha, you will get essentially an exponential multiplied on top of your f of s. I don't know exactly why that is, but let's move on. That's just the first property. The second property is if you take the Laplace transform of e to the minus alpha t times f of t, that will equal to big F of s plus alpha. So that also can be used in a lot of situations and scenarios and places and things. So let's just kind of remember that one as well, although I don't think it's very important. But remember that anyway. Yeah, you'll be able to remember that by remembering it. The Laplace transform of f t over alpha is, of course, alpha f alpha s. So anyway, if you take the Laplace transform of a function, and instead of just passing in t, you pass in t over alpha, the Laplace transform will have an alpha at the outside, a constant alpha, and a constant alpha multiplying the s on the inside. So that's just good to remember. If you multiply by alpha, if you divide by alpha, you'll have that certain property. And of course, the same is opposite. If you multiply it by alpha, you'll have a 1 over s sort of situation. So, if you take the derivative of a function, and you take the Laplace transform of that entire thing, you will get s big F of s minus f naught, f0, which sort of is, you might recognize that from calculus and derivatives, but anyway, it sort of makes sense, I suppose, if you just want to believe in things and pretend that things make sense intuitively when they don't. And yeah, so then just look at that function as long as possible, and that will be your form of studying. Good. Awesome. Okay, so, and we can derive that and prove it, but dear God, I am not going to. That looks awful. It looks completely awful. And let's move on to the final value theorem. The final value theorem states that as the limit of t approaches infinity, the f of t, that is equal to the limit of s approaches 0 of s f of s, which is pretty helpful. So under the following assumptions, it's only true if f of t and the derivative of f of t are Laplace transformable. If that's not the case, then the final value theorem does not hold. It also has to be that the limit of t approaches infinity of f of t has to exist. It can't be something that does not exist as t approaches infinity. So perhaps it has to be a bounded function, has to exist. It can't just be a non-existing value, I guess. F of s is analytic in Re of s, which is greater than 0, except for, at most, a single pole at s equals 0. So we can have one pole at s equals 0 in the real, that's Re of s. The real of greater than 0. So in the real of greater than 0, it can't have any poles except for the s equals 0. So I don't know what analytic means, so we'll take a short break and we'll figure that out. Okay, so what we found out is that an analytic function is a function that is locally given by a convergent power series. There exist both real and complex analytic functions. So anyway, it just can be represented by a convergent power series. So if fs can be represented by a convergent power series in the real of s with greater than or equal to 0, except for at most a single pole at s equals 0. I think that means there can't be any poles. And the derivation of the final value theorem, that is also very ugly. I don't want to talk about it, but let's move on. And here we are. The initial value theorem states that at f of 0 plus, that is equal to the limit of s approaches infinity, sfs. So that's kind of interesting. At 0 plus is the limit s approaches infinity, whereas at limit of ft approaches infinity, it's s equals 0. So it's kind of an opposite sort of thing there, with the limits and the backwards-ians, and I don't know. Yeah, and that also has to have some certain shit, and a convolution is very complicated, but we can simplify it. The long version of convolution should not really be considered for this podcast, I suppose, but the shorthand is, of course, f of t is equal to the inverse Laplace of f1 of s times f2 of s, and f1 is convoluted with f2 in that order. Of course, it could be switched, I suppose. That's basically it. That's basically it. You might want to use the transform tables to solve that, and then you might want to put them in a better order and simplify things, but that's basically how you would solve a convolution. Not a big deal. Let's start talking about inverse Laplace transforms. Now, considering that all the poles are distinct and real of f of s, so f of s can be represented as a denominator and a numerator, b of s on top, a of s on bottom, a of s on bottom, b of s on top. So if all poles are distinct and real, that means that there is, if all poles are distinct and real, that means that there's no poles or x's. Poles are on the bottom, so that means that no a of 0 has those plus p1 plus pn's of any possible poles that are not unreal, so they'll all have to be on the horizontal axis. So if that is the case, then you can solve the inverse Laplace transform by putting it in the right format. ak equals to bs over as times s plus pk, where s is equal to pk. Is that how it works? I guess so. Yeah, okay. So we create ak, and then we take the inverse Laplace transform of ak over s plus pk, and we'll just say that that equals to ak e to the negative pkt. So in that case, I think it's pretty easy. We can just kind of highlight the answer, which is ak e to the negative pkt. So, it's strictly a weighted exponential function that approaches 0. So that's pretty good. It's bounded, it doesn't go off to infinity, as negative exponentials do, they go to 0. So the second situation of the inverse Laplace transform is, of course, the complex conjugate poles. So that's when there is that's an oscillating sort of wave. There's two poles, or perhaps three, there could be one on the real axis, but there's two poles in the imaginary, and they're complex conjugates, so they're negatives of each other in the imaginary plane, so here we are. And for this case, we say that... Okay, so I think the secret behind the inverse Laplace transform of the complex conjugates is basically taking your Laplace transform, your f of s, and putting it in a nicer form so that it meets like an s plus a over s plus a squared plus omega squared type of form, or an omega plus s plus a squared plus omega squared form, and then you can take that and it's equivalent to the Laplace transform of e to the negative at cos omega t. So essentially a complex conjugate pole is an exponential going to 0, possibly with a cosine or sine. So it's an oscillating going to 0 type of function. If there is multiple real poles, that's a little bit trickier, and that's when you have to use br and br minus 1 situations, and br minus j and bi. So that gets a little complicated, so we won't really talk about multiple real poles, I don't know. I don't want to fucking talk about everything on this podcast. It's almost over. Okay, so the last thing we want to talk about on the Colton Phillips podcast is the solution of linear differential equations using the Laplace transform. First, you gotta take the Laplace transform of each term and convert the differential equation into an algebraic equation. Then you have to obtain the Laplace transform of the dependent variable. The solution is obtained after inverse Laplace transform of the dependent variable. So, for example, if you have my double prime plus ky equals u of t, the unit function, that's for b equals 0, and so actually the system is my double prime plus by prime plus ky equals u of t. So in that case, we will have my prime plus ky equals u of t for b equals 0. That'll cancel the first prime out. And then we can sub in the value of y double prime for s squared y of s minus sy of 0 minus y prime of 0, and that will basically be put into that function. So that plus ky, big Y of s equals big U of s. So we've basically taken the Laplace transform of each section, and there you go. And we know the value of y double prime in terms of y primes and y s's and y naughts. So why not? So y of s is basically it simplifies to U of s over ms squared plus k, blah blah blah, plus ms0 plus my0 over ms plus k, and then we inverse Laplace transform that. This is the part I don't understand, but you know what? This podcast is not about understanding, it's about reading. So if you didn't have a good time, maybe you didn't understand what I was saying, maybe I didn't understand what I was saying either. Thanks for watching, goodbye.
Why are you licking my asshole? So I says, cause your pussy tastes like shit. I'm over here now. You see, that's a professional. You didn't even see what I just did, Johnny? I'm over here now. I was over there, now I'm over here. That's a professional. Another guy comes up here, he gets all fucked up, drops the mic, trips over, not me. I'm over there, and now I came over here, but then I backed up, now I'm over here. You see what I'm saying? So what were you trying to tell me before? This chick is sucking my dick, because I'm famous. I mean, she's looking in the mirror going, oh, I can't believe I'm licking Dicey's balls. I'm like, you think that's something? Look what your mother's doing to my ass pipe. And then she's like, well, how are my friends ever gonna believe I met you, Hal? Here's your fucking receipts, stupid. You got all kinds of couples here tonight, nice couples. Here's a nice couple, an interracial couple, I like that.